The outcomes will not be as good because he never received preventative care, he never received treatment, he never received medication. The cost is going to be so much more. Is it $50,000 bucks, $150,000 bucks? Literally, God only knows. But because he's unable to pay it, it doesn't mean that the bill magically disappears. The local county property taxpayer ends up picking up the balance. You see that in your increase in your property tax bills. And for those of us lucky enough to have insurance, we see it in an increase in the premiums we are paying. So, expanding Medicaid, bringing in $10 billion, which is our money, by the way, that we paid originally in income taxes to the federal government, bringing that back to Texas, into communities like Del Rio, or my hometown of El Paso, attracts more providers and doctors, connects more people with care, and lowers property taxes. It's why not only Democrats, but a lot of the representatives' Republican colleagues in the House would get behind a Texas version. We shouldn't accept anybody else's. We come up with our own, a Texas version of Medicaid expansion. Those are the big three. Great jobs, world-class schools, and the ability to see a doctor. And I offer those as the contrast to what's happening right now in our state capital, present company excluded. But I'm talking about our governor, the person in the highest position of public trust and power. Instead of focusing on jobs or supporting school teachers or expanding Medicaid, it's this fixation on transgender kids or banning abortion or all of these things that you and I may not always agree on every single time, but he's choosing to focus on those issues that pit us against one another instead of those ideas that could bring us together. Great jobs, world-class schools, being able to see a doctor. I want to make sure that Texas gets back to the big things that should define us, that the rest of the world should know about us, not the things that we're divided over right now that make the headlines not just in Texas, but around so much of the rest of the world. And my commitment to you, as Bruno just said earlier, is to be a partner for this community. Whatever your priorities are, the infrastructure that you need, the resources that you demand, that you should have, no matter how far away you are from Austin and the centers of power in this state, I want to be that person who makes sure that we deliver and always finds a way, regardless of our differences, including of party affiliation, to come together. That is Texas at its best. And ladies and gentlemen, I saw this firsthand last February when the power grid failed and the lights went out and the heat stopped running and the water stopped flowing and the pipes froze, and some of you were literally getting water out of the river to be able to flush your toilets or cook your dinner that night, or to make sure after you filtered it that you had something to drink. This community came through not because of Democrats and not because of Republicans. It came through because of the people of Del Rio, who were there for one another, never asking, to whom do you pray? Or who did you vote for in the last election? Or any of that jazz. It was just, do you need some help? No me importa. It does not matter to me the differences. I just want to make sure that I'm here for you. That was so impressive to me. And it's the reason that I called the mayor as we were traveling Texas last February trying to help different communities out. And the mayor was out there doing the same thing, going door to door, reaching out to people, helping one another out. I want to make sure that that spirit is reflected in what you see in your state government going forward. Again, I don't want to serve the Democrats of the state of Texas. I don't want to serve the Republicans of the state of Texas. I want to serve all of the people of the state of Texas, right? Let's get back to that. One other issue that I want to bring up, only because I've been so fortunate to talk to so many in local law enforcement here in Del Rio, local leaders here in Del Rio, members of the Border Patrol, state troopers, and even members of the National Guard and State Guard who have been activated and deployed here in Del Rio, all around increased numbers of migrants who are coming to this country through and in between the ports of entry in this part of Texas. First thing that I want to acknowledge is that we do have a real challenge, and we should honor what local leaders and local residents are seeing and saying. And that's why I'm here in the first place, to make sure that I listen to you on all issues, including this one. And I know that it is a point of frustration, and I share your frustration. that the federal government has not been forthcoming with a plan or a strategy to address this. I know that they have the best of intentions, or at least I assume that, but it means nothing if it's not realized in the actions that we are demanding here in the community. And the first one, and the mayor pointed this out from last September, is picking up the phone and calling and listening to local leaders here in Del Rio and finding out what the greatest needs are. We've got to do that. Second, we've got to acknowledge the service of those who are literally willing to do what so few Americans have signed up to do. Now, whether that's being a sheriff's deputy or a member of the local police department, whether it is a Border Patrol agent or those members of the Guard who signed up to serve at a time in this country when fewer than 1% of our fellow Americans post 9/11 have signed up to serve in uniform, to put their lives on the line for America. They're here in this community doing their best for all of us. And I want to make sure that we do our best for all of them. Here's some of the feedback that I've received from them. Talking to Border Patrol agents who say, hey, Beto, working the night shift, I have no idea who it is I'm going to see or apprehend. One agent told me, I picked 80 migrants, including a 2-month-old child, out of a grain hopper. People who are dehydrated, who are at wit's end, who might have lost their lives but for me encountering them, and I'm there to help them out. And Beto, I also come home sometimes, and my wife knows the kind of day I've had because my uniform is shredded. My lip is busted. I got into an encounter with someone who was coming over here and did not want to be apprehended and did not want to follow our laws. This guy said, I don't know that enough people in this country know what we're being asked to do right now. Our very badly broken immigration system. Not broken by this president or even the president who preceded him, but has been broken for at least 40 years and counting so far. We asked the men and women on the front line to do the work that should have been done in Washington, D.C. by our representatives in Congress, and they do it without complaint, and they do it by and large honorably, and they are deserving of our gratitude and our thanks, and they're also deserving of being listened to when they ask for the resources they need, namely mental health care help for those who are encountering people who are the most vulnerable, the most frightened, and sometimes violent right here where our country meets the rest of the world. For the members of the Guard who've been taken from their families, their jobs, their communities for an involuntary 1-year activation away from all the things that they love, who, by the way, have told me to a person when I've listened to them, hey, Beto, I signed up to be there for when this state is in crisis. I signed up to be deployed overseas when my country needs me, and I'm willing to lose my life for America. But I'm not so excited about the political theater or the stunts or something where I really cannot make a difference right now here in this community. We want to honor their service, and I think honoring their service means we only activate the Guard when we truly have a crisis that warrants their service and that kind of commitment. And I pledge right now, as governor, I'm going to make sure that we only activate the Guard when we meet that threshold. Things like Hurricane Harvey in 2017, which dumped 60 inches of rain, which killed our fellow Texans in Southeast Texas, and which necessitated the Guard literally pulling people out of harm's way and danger and certain death, but for their presence. That's a great use for the Guard. Maybe even during the power failure last February, when they were not activated, we lost 700 lives in the state of Texas, people freezing to death in their own homes, because in the energy capital of the world, we could not keep the power going. But let's make sure that we do not use them as a political prop. Let's not engage in stunts. Let's not think about the next election cycle. As one of the Guardsmen just told me when I had the chance to listen to him, we've got to be thinking not about the next 2 years, Beto, the next 4 years, but the next 20 years. And to do that, we've got to be listening to the people on the front lines and those who live in communities like this one. I want to make sure that I acknowledge this because I've heard this from those who are doing among the toughest jobs right here in Del Rio. Last thing that I want to say, and then I'm going to turn the microphone over to you so I can listen to you. That's why we came here. Last thing that I want to say is that we have this historical opportunity to get Texas on the right track. If it's those big 3 issues that I talked about, or if it's Texas stepping up and leading in the national debate about immigration and bringing our Texas values and our understanding and our experience to bear, I want to make sure that Texas realizes its full promise and potential. But to do that, we have to win this election. And that means that we've got to get out there and meet our fellow Texans where they are, knocking on doors, making phone calls, texting for those who prefer to do that, but meeting the millions of voters out there who don't want the fighting, who don't want the stunts, who don't want the politics as usual, but want us focused on the big things that will make a difference in their lives. If you want to be part of this campaign, we want you to join us. There's a sign-up table right here up at the front. There's also a code that you can text to. If you text Texas to 20377, we'll sign you up automatically and ask you to join more than 60,000 volunteers across the state who are already out there knocking on doors right now. We can make sure that Del Rio plays a decisive role in the outcome of this next election. And when we win, and when we do it together, we can realize all of these things that we just talked about today that will allow Texas to get on the right track and live up to its promise. Thank you all for coming out today. Very grateful for your time and looking forward to what you have to say. And a special shout out to Linda, who I ran into at the Stripes convenience store on my way in. Linda, thank you. And Juanita from Eagle Pass, good to see you. Yeah, thank you for making the trip.
All right. If you all raise your hand, I will come to you if you have questions. I'm going to do my first question back here.
It's not a question. First of all, welcome to Del Rio again.
Thank you.
It's gratifying to see you here. I think the issue you brought up that's the most important is the great state of Texas is very unique. And every county is very unique. And you've taken the time to visit each county. In addition, every border city is unique. And so it's important for the leadership to come to Del Rio and see what our challenges are, instead of doing that catch-all border wall, whatever it is, it doesn't work for Del Rio necessarily. And what we're seeing recently with the governor bringing the buses down here or stopping commercial traffic that's crossing the port, that's delaying our commercial traffic, that is causing an economic, it's hurting us economically, and it's hurting our relationship with our sister city. So, as long as you commit yourself to remembering Del Rio as the unique border town that we are, and I think Kim's here, right, Kim? Yeah, she knows. We're very, very special, and she's always going to remind you. I think you know that, right?
That's right. Thank you for coming out and for saying that. Just to bring everybody up to speed, you may not have seen this, but in addition to renting out buses to take migrants to Washington, D.C., which is something that the governor just announced, he's also requiring 100% inspections of all northbound commercial trucks. Now, what does that mean? It means that in the United States and Mexico, which make things together, in our maquilas that we have in El Paso and Ciudad Juarez, in the produce that comes through the far port of entry that is then processed and then sent in deeper into the United States, we depend on each other for more than 600,000 jobs in the state of Texas, more than 6 million across the country, tens of billions of dollars in trade. By inspecting every northbound commercial vehicle, we are taking a logistical supply chain problem that we had going on before because of COVID and the recovery, and exacerbating it and making it worse in Texas than it is anywhere else in the rest of the country. I talked to a produce importer in McAllen a little bit earlier today, and she said that her broker typically brings in 250 produce trucks a day. Friday, they were able to only bring in 63. And she said tomorrow it's really going to hit the fan because the trucks in the United States that come to her warehouse to pick up the produce are going to arrive and there's going to be nothing there for them. And she said supermarket shelves across the country, not just in Texas, will start running out of the produce that we depend on and make possible right here at the U.S.-Mexico border. She says ultimately she may have to start laying off people. It's going to hurt jobs. It's going to cause prices to go up because there's going to be less produce. And that's just one item in our supermarkets. So inflation's going to go up. Job loss is going to be worse. It might threaten the recovery that we're in right now. This is causing real harm without providing any real benefit, including security for our communities. I mentioned stunts earlier. We don't need that kind of stuff. We need to find out how we move forward. A guest worker program, for example, that allows those who want to legally and in an orderly fashion, following our laws, come here and work jobs in the United States and then return to their home country, which many want to do. Let's make sure that it's easy to do that, and let's work with Texas leaders who might have some ideas on how to do it. Do we want to raise the visa caps so people aren't waiting 20 years to be able to join a family member here? Do we want to process asylum claims far more quickly? It takes 5 years to process an asylum claim in the state of Texas right now. It should take 5 months max to be able to do that. Do we need, you mentioned all border communities are different. In El Paso, we have processing facilities, lots of space. We have Annunciation House, which is a charity that houses people before they go on. When I met Sandra, the woman behind the counter at the Stripes, where I saw Linda, I said, Sandra, tell me what you're seeing right here on this corner. And she said, I see migrants who come here who don't know how to get to San Antonio. They think they're gonna walk the highway to get there. They have homemade signs. We don't have that problem in El Paso because we have the infrastructure set up there. So, long way to answer your question. Yes, I will always come back to Del Rio and listen to the people of Del Rio to make sure that we're providing solutions that the people of Del Rio have come up with in the first place. Thank you for asking. Appreciate it.
Hello. I actually have a comment on the infrastructure and everything, and I also just want to recognize that we also have Councilman Ojeda here. He also showed up. I think he went inside. Just want to make sure we recognize all the current officials right now. To that end, what you just brought up about infrastructure and coming back to Del Rio, I want to make sure that Del Rio stays on the map as far as infrastructure Interstate 27 goes and the expansion for that. That's something that I was I fought very hard to get it in the 86 legislation, which was one of my first babies when I was not worried about the crises involved. And I know Representative Morales has also helped support the expansion of the Interstate 27 going from Lubbock down to Laredo. And the reason why I bring this up is because Eagle Pass and Del Rio are the only two border communities that do not have direct access to interstate systems. And we also, with that, will be producing jobs. And what I learned and observed last year during the winter storm crisis is that part of the problem is moving energy, and energy from the Permian Basin down to the border and beyond, and vice versa. All of our goods go up north. So I just want to make sure that we focus and hear a commitment from your office to continue to push that forward. And secondly, also, one thing that I really want to emphasize is that we do need our federal representation and federal organizations to come in and build up the infrastructure, because albeit that we have immigration crisis and the solution for it, like you just mentioned, Del Rio, Eagle Pass do not have the facilities that we need to help process expeditiously the people that are coming in. No matter what we sit on the table on that, we do need the infrastructure. And that's one of my biggest struggles right now is that FEMA, for example, had a meeting 2 weeks ago, 3 weeks ago, and they expect border communities like Del Rio and Eagle Pass to collaborate with other agencies, but I had to tell them they don't exist. Like, we don't have other agencies to collaborate with. Part of it is to provide vaccines or to provide extra food or what have you. And I said, look, we only have 2 grocery stores or 3 grocery stores, at best. It's like what I'm trying to emphasize is the infrastructure that's needed to move the produce, to move the products, and I think that one of the big facilitators will be access to the freeway.
Absolutely, and this ports to planes issue that you brought up, you all may know this, but the mayor was helping to chair something that brings together communities like Lubbock, where we produce a lot of the food and fiber and fuel, even in that part of rural Texas, we extended out to the Permian Basin, with the ports that are the economic lifeline for the state of Texas. And that allows Del Rio to play an outsized role in what this state is doing. So the answer is yes, you've got my commitment to that. And we should, at a time that the federal government, and by the way, Republicans and Democrats in the federal government, have come together for the largest infrastructure spending program, I think, since Dwight Eisenhower was the president of the United States. I want to make sure that as those tens of billions of dollars come to Texas, that they are spent where they're going to do the most good for the state of Texas. And it's hard to make a stronger argument than the one that the mayor just did right now, because infrastructure here that he's describing is good for Del Rio, but it is great for the state of Texas. It allows us to exponentially maximize trade opportunities with Mexico, things that we produce and make here or in other parts of Texas, getting them out to markets around the world. And at the end of the day, it means more jobs in Del Rio, more jobs in the state of Texas. So I'm going to make that argument, not just here in Del Rio, but to the rest of the state. Thank you. Appreciate it.
Straight back.
Thank you for coming.
Thank you.
You brought up some issues, and they were all good issues. But you didn't talk about voting rights or the division that we have in our country right now. You know, at 68 years old now, I think my country's never been as divided as it is right now. And I'm concerned about the future, about democracy and the voting. It seems like there's a lot of attacks on voting rights, and I'm not seeing what we're doing to combat it and handle it. I'd just like to get your thoughts on that if you could.
Yeah, you're absolutely right about that. And it's ironic that it's happening in Texas, because it was our Texas president, Lyndon Baines Johnson, who in '65 signed the Voting Rights Act into law, and for the first time created a multiracial democracy in the United States of America. And of course, he was pushed to do that by people who came to meetings just like these and asked questions just like yours to make sure that we were doing the right thing. And then in '75, 10 years later, Barbara Jordan, who was the first black woman to be elected from, I think, the South since since forever, she expanded the VRA specifically for communities like mine in El Paso and Del Rio to make sure that Mexican Americans and language minorities had equal access to the ballot. You'd go to a town like Catula, which was overwhelmingly Mexican American majority, but also overwhelmingly Spanish speaking. And there was a functional literacy test. People could not read the ballot. They weren't voting. They weren't participating. And Texas helped to change that. And yet now in Texas, this is the hardest state in the nation in which to cast a ballot or to register. And that's not right. And it's not just me, a Democrat, saying it. There was a 95-year-old World War II veteran who was unable to vote in the March primary this year. This guy, talk about service to country and a self-sacrificing love. He was fighting fascism half a world away in 1944, defending democracy at home, and cannot vote in his own democracy here because the state legislature, the governor, signed into bill a law that requires you to match the form of ID you use when you want to vote by mail with the ID you used when you first registered to vote, in his case, 70 years ago. We have rejected tens of thousands of ballots in the state of Texas. They are Republican ballots, they're independents, and they're Democrats. I'm glad you brought this up, but your question is, Beto, what are we going to do about this? You would like to see, I would like to see, the Department of Justice come to Texas and enforce the Voting Rights Act, but they are not going to do that. Do not hold your breath. No cavalry coming to our rescue here in the state. I seriously doubt the governor's going to call a special session to cure the problems in that election bill that prevented that 95-year-old veteran and many tens of thousands of others from voting. So it's on us. And I mentioned signing up to be part of this campaign. When we ask people to go to the doors of these Texas voters, we're helping to explain, hey, folks, these are the new rules of the road. If you're going to vote by mail, I need you to know that you're going to have to match ID. If you have a disability and you have a caretaker or family member who's assisting you, there are new ID requirements for them as well. And make sure you sign in the right places on the envelope and on the ballot, all of that jazz. Our volunteers can make sure that the voters in Texas are educated on this. I mentioned 60,000 volunteers. We're trying to get to 100,000 by the time that Get Out the Vote starts in October. I want you to be part of that. That's how we're going to overcome it. And there's going to be some sweet justice in this, in the very people who I believe were targeted for suppression and intimidation and disenfranchisement. They're going to be the margin of victory when we win this on the 8th of November. So that's how we meet this and change the laws once we get in. Thank you. There we go.
I'm Mario Vasquez, and I met you a couple years ago. Before I leave, I want to show you a picture we took together.
Wonderful.
But I'm very concerned. I served in the military 75 years ago. And I see the National Guard, or State Guard, whatever it is, and I don't see what they're doing, what they're supposed to be doing except sitting down in the hot sun and looking around. They're not provided with shades. I know it, when I was in the Army, we had something to do. They had nothing. So what's going to happen to them?
Thank you for asking the question. And thank you for your service. And I'll tell you what, I think as I shared with you last time we met, I had the chance to work on the House Veterans Affairs Committee while I was in Congress for 6 years, the highest honor of my life. And I was struck by the example you just gave time and again, which even after service, every veteran I've ever met continues to serve and continues to stand up for those who are currently serving or other veterans to make sure they're okay. The Vietnam era, for example, those men and women were treated so poorly by this country when they returned, and yet they're at the front of the line right now advocating for those who served in Iraq and Afghanistan to make sure that they are treated better. You're doing the same thing right now for these members of the Guard, and what you just shared with me is exactly what I've heard from them. Look, there are pay issues. We cut their earned tuition benefits, making it harder for them to go to college, to go to an institution just like this one. But many of them that I've listened to say, you know what, Beto, I could get over that if there was something that I was actually being asked to do day in, day out. At these observation posts, they're encountering almost no one. And when they do, they have no powers to arrest or detain anybody. They can spot somebody, they can call it into DPS, they can call it into Border Patrol. And look, we're grateful for their service, even under these trying conditions. But the best way to demonstrate that gratitude would be to end this involuntary activation, allow them to return to their families and their communities, and only activate them when there's a real emergency or disaster going forward. Thank you for asking.
Hi, Beto. This is not a question, it's just how I feel. Okay, the first thing we have to do is get you elected, right? Okay.
We agree, yes.
So I'm a senior citizen, and I really don't do social media, so if you could tell your campaign director to save funds for, like, as it gets closer to the campaign, for billboards and TV ads. TV ads, that's where the Republicans have just done bad to the Democrats. And I remember that Chip Roy and Wendy Davis, I would just get so mad that, that Wendy Davis's commercials weren't hitting back as hard. So I really want you to be our governor and, just go for it all the way. And I'm glad you're calling the governor a thug and all the things that he really is. So I'm with you all the way.
Thank you so much. I love that. Chris is our communications director who's back here. He heard every word that you said, and he's going to make sure that we get to... And you vote at a higher level than any other demographic in the state. And even better, I keep mentioning these 60,000 volunteers and more, is having someone knock on your door. Because the greatest TV ad, the greatest social media campaign, all of those pale in comparison to another human being taking the time to meet you and say, hey, there's this guy Beto, he's focused on great jobs, world-class schools, the ability to see a doctor, he can bring us together in this state, I want you to vote for him. I think there's a better chance you'll do that if someone asks you in person than in any other way. But in case we don't get to that person's door, Chris is saying yes on the billboards and yes on the TV ads as well. Thank you. Thanks for asking.
Yes, just to follow up on that, my concern also has been the narrative, because we have allowed the Republicans to get ahead on the narrative. And it's wonderful to go to people's houses, but people are intimidated now. When they hear a knock on the door or somebody calls them on the phone, they don't want to answer. So the narrative and the communications person really has to get ahead and be on the offensive rather than on the defensive. And that's where I think we've kind of been a little bit slow on that. But that's one thing. When it comes to immigration, historically, this country has done so much better when the greater number of immigrants have been coming in. The economy has always been at a greater level. And that is a mantra that the Democrats should be pursuing and repeating over and over again. When you talk about the grid and deregulation, it kind of goes beyond people's heads. Maybe not the people who are here and are really familiar with it. You need to show an electric bill and show how in Texas there is a monopoly. We actually pay two bills. JEXA, Reliant, CP&L, all they do is process the bills. One company owns the whole grid, unless you're part of the system, the one in Quail Run, what do you call it, a community? the co-op, thank you. But otherwise, if everyone will look at their electric bill, no matter what company you are with, American Electric Power, and it is the only owner and a monopoly here. And it's ridiculous what we're paying. When it comes to a federal level, the mantra, they had spoken about lowering the Medicare age to 60. I would be happy with 62. And that goes back to the Build Back Better bill, because the people who are out building our bridges, who are working construction, by the time they're 60, they're exhausted. They've been in the hot sun, and we need to lower the age. That is something that all people want, Republicans and Democrats. Lower the Medicare age to 62. We also need to have in our health system, where we lose a lot of the Republicans, we speak only of one health system, and that is the allopathic health system. Just as there are Democrats and Republicans and independents and socialists and democratic socialists, we have different kinds of health systems, and it should be available to everyone, not just the people the elites who can afford it. Thank you very much.
Great comment. Wow, you had a lot, and it was all so good. And I'll tell you, yes, that was incredible. You mentioned making sure that we tell a very simple narrative about why things are the way that they are. You mentioned the electric bill. Everyone should do exactly what she just asked us to do. Look at your electricity bill today and compare that to a year ago or 2 years ago. Across Texas, on average, we're seeing increases of $45 a month, every single month following the grid collapse. Because instead of getting the money back from those who illegally stole $11 billion in profits over 5 days when you were freezing here in Del Rio, Greg Abbott made the ratepayer pay to foot the bill at the end of the day. That's all of us. We call that the Abbott tax, that $45 a month more that you are paying. When it comes to immigration, yes, we are the defining immigrant state here in Texas. We are so successful because of the immigrants who have chosen us. And most of us, not all of us, but most of us at some point in our family history had that immigrant. In mine, it was 5 generations ago from Ireland, fleeing starvation and famine and certain death, showing up at our borders, our maritime borders at that time, and scaring the crap out of people when they showed up, penniless and destitute. And are they going to change our culture and our politics? And is their Catholicism going to disrupt our way of life? And at some point they were integrated. And I hope your works have contributed some way to the country's success. But that's true of every generation of immigrant from every part of the world. I think what we can also agree on is that we want those who come here to do so in an orderly fashion, to follow our laws. We want it to be predictable. We want to make sure that we secure the safety of our communities. And no state better than Texas has a chance to do that. And just like you said, Democrats nor Republicans have a monopoly on the good ideas. We just have to decide that we're going to lead and remind people why this is a good thing for us economically and in our lives, and not just for the immigrants themselves. These are wonderful, wonderful points that you are making. The points that you made on healthcare, on making sure that working Texans who at the end of their time serving this state are able to count on a retirement that they can use while they are still ready to use it and young enough to use it. I love that. And so thank you for speaking such common sense to all of us here today. We're grateful to you.
No question, I don't think, but more comments, because I've heard a lot of things here that resonate with me. And I'd be remiss not to share it with members of my community. My name is Claudia, born and raised in Del Rio. First time I drive back home from Austin to volunteer for a candidate, because you walk the talk and you deserve to be governor of Texas. We deserve Beto O'Rourke to be governor of Texas. The gentleman in the back that asked about, what could we do about voting rights? I want everyone here to know that he showed up at the Capitol. That's actually why I'm here, why I'm inspired to work in the campaign to volunteer, because when those voting bills were working their way through the state legislature, I saw a live stream of Beto driving from El Paso, and open invitation to members of the public to show up and testify against these bad voting bills. And I will be the first to tell you, you don't have to know what you're doing. I did not know what I was doing, but I knew that they were bad bills, and I knew that we had to get our testimony in the record if we had a chance to maybe fight it after the fact. So, you know, he showed up and he tried and he worked at it. And I can tell you personally, I spent the weekend at the Capitol. I literally showed up Saturday morning at 7 a.m. and walked out of there Sunday morning at 5 a.m. And I testified maybe an hour after him at 3 a.m. Sunday morning. So he's doing it, okay? And two more things. I'm a product of both immigrants and of the public education system here in Del Rio, and I want to say thank you for showing respect to the immigrant community, who are not rapists, who are not all criminals, but who are looking to make a better life for themselves, like most normal human beings do. So thank you for treating this community with respect. And lastly, because I touched on education, absolutely the love of learning over our lifetime is absolutely what's going to help the children in the state of Texas and ultimately everyone in the state of Texas. My 6th grade teacher, Mr. Perez, is here, so I want to thank him. And he told me about some terrible bills working their way through the legislature that actually penalize people like him that want to, you know, provide services to our school children when there's a need and a shortage for teachers. Like, how dumb is that? So thank you, Mr. Perez and Darisa. Absolutely, I'm a math nerd. Somehow I ended up studying accounting, and I've done so well. I've traveled all over the world with my mother, so well that I'm going to dedicate as much of my time as I can to get you elected.
I love it. Thank you. That's so great. That's awesome. That's so cool. And I love that it was your 6th grade teacher as well that changed your life, and that he's here. That's amazing. Thank you.
Well, Mr. O'Rourke, you've covered a lot of topics today, and I don't mean to sandbag you with this next question, but I know a lot of people who are on the fence. There are people who agree with a lot of the policies and the things that you're saying. There are conservatives who don't want their power to go out. There are soldiers here on the border who want to go home. But a lot of these individuals also like guns, and I'm sure you're familiar with the soundbite that has been paraded around social media on Twitter and Instagram, saying, hell yes, we'll take your guns, we'll take your AR-15s. And I wanted to give you an opportunity to speak to those people who are on the fence, who, in the face of all of the other things that they support on your agenda, are afraid of your position on the Second Amendment. And the Republican Party has done a very good job of making you out to be the boogeyman that everybody should be afraid of on the left. So I wanted to give you a chance to give a more nuanced opinion about your position on guns and violence against children as it pertains to guns and gun legislation.
Yeah, thank you for asking the question. First thing that I want you to know, and I please ask you to share this with anyone in your life, as governor, we're going to protect the Second Amendment, but we're also going to do a far better job of protecting the people in our communities and in our lives. We lose thousands of our fellow Texans every year to gun violence. Sometimes in high-profile mass shootings, Midland, Odessa, Sutherland Springs, Santa Fe High School, El Paso, Texas. And then sometimes it is so numbingly common that the people killed never make the headlines. We didn't even know that they existed because there's not enough ink to print all the names, given how frequently we're losing lives to people in this state. And it does not have to be that way. We can do both, protect the Second Amendment and protect people's lives. Like probably most of you, if not every single one of you, I grew up here in Texas, grew up on the border, grew up in a household where we had firearms. And in fact, I was taught to shoot by my Uncle Raymond, who was an El Paso County Sheriff's deputy. And the pride of his life was he was the sharpshooting champion of that department. And so he taught me and my sisters how to shoot. But importantly, he taught us the responsibility of owning a firearm that comes with that. And that's something that my wife Amy and I have imparted to our 3 kids as we've made sure that they have the best education around guns possible so that we can use them for hunting or keep them for self-defense or for practice or sport or collection or whatever. It's nobody's business but ours, right here in the state of Texas. But to the gentleman's comment and the quote of what I said at that debate in 2019, it really came back to an issue that was just raised about immigration, and even one that was raised about democracy, because there was a guy who drove 600 miles from Allen, Texas to El Paso in August of 2019, who had been warned by those in power, the president and even our current governor, about an invasion, about animals, about rapists, about criminals, about people coming to get us or replace us in the state of Texas. And in fact, the manifesto that this guy who drove those 600 miles posted echoed many of the comments that our governor and our former president had used about immigrants, and specifically immigrants from Mexico. And when he walked into that Walmart on the 3rd of August 2019 with an AK-47, a weapon that was originally designed for use on a battlefield, because it just shreds to pieces every tissue inside of your body so that you bleed out before you can get up and hurt one of our soldiers on the battlefield or a soldier from the other side. He took that weapon in there and he said he came to kill Mexicans. He wrote that he was repelling the invasion of Hispanics who were going to politically take over this state. Now, I flew back to El Paso on the 3rd of August to be with the families and to be with those who had been shot. And I met some of those who would later die of their injuries. And I still stay in touch with their families. And the question that haunted me in that moment was the wife of someone who was shot who said, "Hey, Beto, why does anyone need a weapon of war? Why do we have to be afraid of this happening again?" And I thought about it and I said, any politician in the room will know this, and I'm no different. We like to think we're pure in our consideration. We always do the right thing no matter the consequences. But there's a political cost to any decision. When I thought about her answer, or her question, I said, I don't think anybody should have an AR-15 or an AK-47. You don't need them for hunting. You don't need them for self-defense. You don't need them for protection in the house. That thing was designed to kill people on a battlefield. And if we allow it in our lives, in our communities, we'll continue to see people killed this way. And so I said the unpopular thing that was honest and true, because I could not face those people in El Paso. I could not look them in the eyes. Instead, I chose the politically convenient route instead of the honest one. That I was afraid to speak truth to power on this issue. This is a longer answer than the gentleman wanted from his question, but I want you to know why I said something that so many people still remember so many years afterwards. I hope that you would do the same thing too. If 23 people in your community who are part of your life, of who you see yourself as and how you define yourself, were taken from you in this way. And if you knew that that was going to continue to happen across this state and across this country unless we change course. So that's why I said what I did. But I also want to say this. There is more that unifies us on this issue than divides us. Most of us gun owners and non-gun owners alike can agree on universal background checks, for example, or safe storage laws, or something known as an extreme risk protection order that stops someone who has a firearm from harming themselves or harming somebody maybe in their school before it's too late. And from listening to my fellow Texans ever since Greg Abbott signed into law permitless carry, and especially listening to police officers and sheriff's deputies, just like my great uncle was, who say that makes their job a little bit harder. More cops and deputies have been shot down in this state than any other state. Makes it more difficult to protect the lives of those that they were sworn to protect and to serve. I want to make sure that we get back to that responsible tradition of gun ownership in Texas. No more of this permitless carry stuff without a background check or any training whatsoever. And more of the things that most of us can agree on, like universal background checks. So I'm so glad that you asked this. It is so important. Obviously, it's very close to my heart and the experience that all of us lived in El Paso. But the last thing I want to say is that there are people here among us who own AR-15s and AK-47s. And I just want to acknowledge that you own them responsibly, that you take that obligation seriously, that we may disagree on this issue, but we're Americans and we're Texans, and we can disagree civilly and still find enough common ground to make progress at the end of the day. Thanks for asking the question. Appreciate it. Algo más.
Okay, this is going to be our last one.
Bethel, thank you very much for being here. One of the things that I know that you didn't touch on, and I'm not sure if anybody else here has issues with this is we talk about kids and we talk about the upbringing, the next generation. I think we should go back to where it starts in the family court. I think Representative Morales, he actually signed a bill that unfortunately didn't go through, HB 803. Very near and dear to me. It's what it does, it pretty much sets a standard for family court, 50-50, presumed 50-50 parenting, unless otherwise, found that the other parent can't do it. If they're not fit, willing, and able to do it. I just asked, I want to know what's your stance on 50-50 shared parenting as a standard beginning. What we've also known is that down the road, these kids, they, end up in jail. They end up killers. They end up, stuff like that. What can we do, or what is your stance as far as 50-50 shared parenting to begin?
Thanks for raising this, and I want to make sure that I have a chance to listen to you after the town hall, listen to the representative on this as well to better understand it. But having fairness in parenting and custody, I think that's something that we can all get behind. And even in the terms that you just described it to me without having a lot more detail, I'm struck by the fairness of the proposition, that parents share custody equal as a beginning proposition, and then other factors are considered, and then a determination that's in the best interest of the kid, right, at the end of the day, is made. But if you'll allow me, it also reminds me of another issue that I think is near and dear to our hearts as well, which is the fact that we have about 30,000 kids in the foster care system in the state of Texas who maybe during these proceedings, or maybe in a home where they were not able to work things out, that child was removed from their family and placed into the custody and care of the state of Texas. I know this is something that the representative is working to fix, but I think we need more urgency from our next governor on making sure that those kids are placed back again with family when it is safe to do so, that we always prioritize family when we can, that we make sure these families have the resources, including counseling or access to mental health, that can improve living conditions for those kids, that we think twice about privatizing the care in the foster care system. We're concerned about what we're reading about out of Bastrop and the refuge center, where it may look like those kids were abused again, who were rescued from abuse in the first place. And then, just in case anyone hasn't heard this, it bears repeating, we lost the lives of 100 children in our custody in the state of Texas just last year. We have evidence that hundreds were trafficked, their bodies were rented. These are the most vulnerable among us. And I know that we are called to do better, and we've got to meet that crisis with the urgency that it demands. Spare no expense, make sure that we mount all the resources, and certainly keep our eye and focus and attention on improving the situation before another child is harmed. So whether it's custody within a current family, or it's the well-being of that child if they've had to be removed from that family, I want us to do better for our kids in the state of Texas, because as you mentioned, as Larissa reminded us, they are our future, they are our present, they're the reason that we're doing this in the first place. Thank you for asking. Ms. Connor, do you have a question? Oh, cool. So if everyone's okay with this, I'm just going to turn around. Cynthia is going to take a group picture just to commemorate that we were here. Maybe we'll put it on a billboard someday in Del Rio. But thank you all so much for coming out on a Sunday evening, being with us, asking such great questions, and welcoming us so warmly today. We're very grateful to you all. Thank you so much.
All right, if you're sitting down, stay sitting down. If you're standing up or you're in the back and you'd like to join, please come on in. And if you're going to join in the back, just stand up. We're going to do a big, beautiful Del Rio group picture. Let's get everyone in there. Come on in. All right, squeeze in, there we go. Oh, this is great. This is wonderful. All right, on the count of 3, we're going to say Del Rio. Ready? We're going to take a few. 1, 2, 3, Del Rio! All right, hold on. 1, 2, 3, go Del Rio! That's great. And then we're going to stay and we're going to take pictures if you all want to hang out.